Welcome to Module 1 presentation, a little bit about grammar terms. You might have noticed in your Langen textbook that some of the terms that he uses to describe grammatical ideas are different than the ones that you might have been taught when you were growing up in school. So we're going to talk for just a few minutes about what he's meaning when he uses certain terms and how those correspond to traditional grammar terms that you might have heard before. He chooses different terms for some grammar concepts, probably to make the concept seem less intimidating. It's possible that Langen, the author of the textbook, felt like that using grammar jargon or traditional grammar terms might seem scary to students or might seem off-putting, and is trying to choose different terms that maybe seem less threatening. He also seems to be fond of terms that express what the grammatical concept is that's happening. For example, using joining words, just because that expresses even more what's actually happening than traditional grammar term. So that's probably why he's choosing different words. One thing that he does differently is what he calls in his textbook a complete thought. Traditionally, we would call an independent clause. What that means is that the group of words has a subject and a verb and can stand alone as a sentence. It's an independent clause, or what Langen calls a complete thought. One reason it's maybe better to use the term independent clause than complete thought is simply because complete thought as a concept could be subjective, right? Lots of students might hear a sentence that's actually a sentence fragment that maybe doesn't have a subject and verb, but if the sentence fragment is comprehensible, if the idea makes sense, then students might still call that a complete thought. So just know that when he says complete thought, he's meaning what we would traditionally call an independent clause, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anything that you would consider a complete thought is necessarily an independent clause. Just make sure that it has a subject and verb and it can stand alone as a sentence. Another concept that he refers to is what he calls a dependent statement. Traditionally, we would call this a dependent clause. That's a group of words that has a subject and a verb, but cannot stand alone as a sentence because it begins with a subordinating conjunction. That obviously introduces another term. So moving on to that idea, he calls them dependent words. Dependent words or subordinating conjunctions are words like because, after, since, and others. These are listed in the book on page 447 and 448. If you were ever taught in school, don't start a sentence with because, then this is probably why. Because is a subordinating conjunction or a dependent word, which basically means that if it is appearing in a clause, that clause is a dependent clause and needs to be attached to an independent clause to be correct. So dependent words equals subordinating conjunctions. What he calls joining words are coordinating conjunctions. The word joining is pretty similar to coordinating and then expresses the idea of connection and bringing two things together. Coordinating conjunctions, or what he calls joining words, connect independent clauses, and these have to be used with a comma. So if you're going to connect one independent clause, which has a subject and verb and can stand alone, to another independent clause, there needs to be one of these coordinating conjunctions in between as a connector, or sometimes you can also do that with punctuation like a semicolon. But if there's going to be a coordinating conjunction, there also needs to be a comma. Keep in mind that conjunctions do not always work as coordinating conjunctions. So some conjunctions are what he would call joining words, like and, sometimes are coordinating in that sometimes that conjunction is connecting two independent clauses, but other times that conjunction is just connecting or joining two random nouns. So if I said bread and milk, in that case and is joining the two nouns bread and milk, but it's not acting as a coordinating conjunction because it's not coordinating or joining two independent clauses. And the coordinating conjunctions can be remembered using the word fanboys. Langen lists the coordinating conjunctions as he calls them joining words in his book, but he doesn't talk about the Fanboys acronym as a way to remember them, and I think that's really helpful. So Fanboys is a good way to remember these. So Fanboys stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. These are all of the coordinating conjunctions. There are only 7. There are many, many subordinating conjunctions, really probably too many to memorize, but there are only 7 coordinating conjunctions, and they can be remembered using the word fanboys. Keep this in mind and go ahead and memorize these. It's not difficult, particularly with this word to help. This will appear on quizzes and tests probably in this class, and so I wanted to draw it to your attention as a way to help you to prepare for that. And it's also just a really easy way to remember these so that you can be using them in your writing. So I hope that this presentation has been able to clarify for you some of the differences between Langan's grammar terminology and traditional grammar terms.